Today we're going to look at Sinumerik Integrate's Manage My Resources tools. This application is on the Sinumerik Integrate server for your local area network on the shop floor, and it's designed to help manage both your physical and digital tool inventory, which I'll be showing here today. So what we're looking at right now is just the standard login screen. I have admin user roles, so essentially I'm seeing all the possible different fields that you can play around with and monitor and manage your tools. You'll also see there are programs here as well, so Manage My Resources programs would be another application on this module, but I won't be getting into that today. So starting right at the top, we're going to look at the tool component master data. Essentially, this is just looking at your master data sets associated to your tool components. Let me just log in here real fast. So what does that mean? Essentially, if I was to have a end mill and a spindle, for example, and these being the master data sets, this is your one and only end mill that's representative from your CAM systems or your bill of materials, kind of like a logistics perspective. What you're using is this end mill, right? But if you had, I don't know, 5 instances of this end mill, each one that has a different life cycle of machining or different materials that's been machined on, that leaves a fingerprint, almost like an instance data. You can compare and contrast the 5 end mills, but they will all be different. Think of it as like 10 people were to buy the same car. After a year of use, are they still the same car? They'll be the same make and model, right? But there may be different wear and tears or different modifications and changes and so on. And that concept can kind of apply here into tools as well. So this screen where we're looking at right now would be your overview of these master data sets for your tool components. And then screens later on will kind of be managing that physical inventory and different instances of those components themselves. So from here, you can kind of see we can add different configurations and information associated to each one of the components, as well as to add them yourself. If we were to add one, for example, we have tool component ID, is it a wear part, classifications, order numbers, if it's a supplier, so you're rebuying tools, for example, and then any additional user-defined data. So if you want to create your own field, for example, you can do so here, define the attributes, maybe name it whatever you want, as well as attach some additional files associated to your tool component. Let's go back out. I don't need to save. And now we're going to look at the tool component stacks. Now this is going to be your actual inventory, your physical inventory of those components scattered around the shop floor. So what we're looking at right here is your quantity used, your quantity unused, as well as the warning limit of these tool components. So right now in my virtual environment that I'm playing around with here, I have one unused end mill and then one end mill that is in use with also a warning limit. I should clarify, the warning limit in this case is basically doing a countdown. So imagine if you are, you have 10 high priority tools on the shop floor, and around when you get to maybe two tools left in the inventory before you have to repurchase tools or just try to stay afloat of the constant usage. This warning limit that we can configure here, I can actually click the edit button. So we can configure this warning limit to basically say anytime we're about to use a new tool, a new pop-up will appear suggesting, hey, maybe you should procure and maybe buy some more tools, or I don't know, remeasure the old tools to see if they're still within scope. Because we want to get that back into circulation to make sure production doesn't stop at any point. And having that transparency is super helpful in determining when you can schedule different jobs and different projects and things like that. You'll also notice that we have the storage place per component. There's other screens that you can search and manipulate the fields to figure out where your tools are located on the shop floor, but here's just a simple high-level overview of essentially where your tools are located. This would be the root directory followed by where the machine is located, as well as the cabinet. So in this specific case, you have the root directory, which is the top level. Managed is the name of the virtual machine that I have defined here. Adjacent to the virtual machine is the machine cabinet, so it's the actual cabinet adjacent to your machine, and then it's suggesting that it's in the first drawer of that cabinet. So you can kind of go down a variety of levels. What we've been looking at so far has just been the components. Now we're going to look at the tool master data. Now the tool master data is taking the components you have on your shop floor. This isn't required. Sometimes facilities don't use an inventory management system for their components, but if that is something that you might be interested in, you also have the ability to do so. But going on from there, you have the tool master data. And the same thing applies from the master data for your tools to your components. Here we're looking at the virtual representation, the master data set of your sample tool assembly. And if I was to click on this, we can see a variety of, again, more information associated to the tool assembly. We have data of cutting edges, for example, the tool geometry, again, more user-defined information, the bill of materials, and this is what I want to highlight here. The bill of materials is building off of the tool components. So here we have our end mill and our spindle as well that we are utilizing for those tool components. So if we're on the shop floor, imagine we're on the shop floor, we're scoped out to use the sample tool assembly for our next job, and we realize we need a spindle as well as an end mill. From our inventory component management, we then notice, oh, we're reaching the warning limit, or maybe we're not able to even assemble this tool to its full capability. Lastly, we also have our files, so we can throw in additional information if we would like, and then our revision history for any time this tool assembly has changed over the course of time. It's all being categorized and logged here. Expanding out from our master tool sets, you also have your tool stock. Again, if you're utilizing a tool master data set, that's your representative make, model, no changes, right? The tool stock applies for your tool inventory. So how many of those master data sets are being used on the shop floor? Each one is unique. Each one has been handled differently. Each one has a different wear and tear. So it's important to kind of keep track of this information. What we're looking at right now is essentially all the tools that are currently located on a virtual machine. So here we're just looking at essentially the physical tools across the shop floor. If I was to scroll down, we would see we have our sample tool assemblies that I've been playing around with. So this is all located here. There are different filters and different criteria that we can change and manipulate. So if you're looking specifically on like one machine, for example, we can filter this out to just Sinutrain, or we can filter it out to managed. So imagine if you had a variety of machines on the shop floor, and you don't want to see all of them, you can manipulate the filter here. What this is also showcasing is, if you noticed, we have our different cutting tools associated to our machine, but then it even goes so far as to say in which pocket of the magazine these tools are located. So again, if we're following the root, you have your root directory of all the machines on the shop floor. Then you have Sinutrain, which is a representative machine that I've been playing around with, and then the magazine and which pocket that magazine is located, or which pocket the tool is located within that magazine. And that level of detail can be pretty helpful to a variety of different use cases on the shop floor. So what we just covered so far is essentially that management aspect. You have your virtual representation of your tools, the master data sets, and then your physical representation of tools with the stock of components or the stock assemblies. And again, these are all using and manipulating the physical inventory of your shop floor. If I go to the next row here, we have our provide tools, monitoring tools, tools on managed machines, and planning tool needs. So let me jump into provide tools real fast. And here I just created a simple task. This can be automated to an extent, but what this is essentially doing is defining a tool assembly that needs to be measured at a presetter, for example, before it's being brought down to the shop floor, because you want to capture these offset measurements. You want to make sure you have the latest and greatest offset measurements to then apply during that machining process. So I already obtained the tool assembly, the ID 1234. It's being processed by myself as admin. If you had 20 different operators or users utilizing the software, they would all each have their own different user roles, and you can kind of take ownership, for example. So I've already taken over processing. If I go to my personal tasks, a new, essentially a Kanban board is presented. Each one with a different task and kind of telling you the status of where this tool assembly is located across the shop floor. Right now it's in the to be obtained stage, and it's basically saying, hey, go to your tool component crib, or go locate where these components are on the shop floor, allowing us to then begin that assembly stage. So let's assume I gather all these tools, and then I'm now assembling them. And I just simply click and drag over to the to be assembled column. And here we're essentially looking at, before you even assemble these tools, is it needed or is it required? Essentially, do we have that physical tool inventory? So right, what we're seeing here is the quantity required, quantity retrieved. We're simply able to confirm, download, print, and have that transparency of this is what's happening on the shop floor. And again, here we have our warning limit has been reached, because previously, if you remember, that warning limit was defined to 1, and I only had one of these components left on the shop floor inventory. So as I'm assembling my tool on the shop floor, it is also managing my tool inventory and saying, hey, by the way, you're below that limit, you're below that warning limit. We need to get more tools on the shop floor in order for us to, keep production going, right? You don't want to run out of tools for production. So I'll click OK. The next stage, essentially, from this process here, during the to be assembled stage, if you're integrating to a presetter, we do have a kind of like a shared folder system. So right here, it would generate an XML file representative of that tool assembly being sent to the tool presetter. The presetter then gets a job on its dashboard or screen to then make those measurements of the tool, and then it would automatically be brought over. So if I was to bring this over to be measured, XML file is generated, and now the tool is being measured. And then once that tool is done being measured on the presetter, it can generate an INI file, for example, a .ini file with all the offset measurements associated to that tool, which will then overwrite that tool instance in a virtual environment. So assuming a presetter has now measured all the tools, sent the INI file over, this step of the to be measured stage for this tool is automatically going to be brought over to be provided. And I apologize, this is all, virtual and just kind of like close your eyes and visualize this process. But I don't have a presetter to kind of walk around and present this storyboard. So if we're, again, to recap, imagine you're collecting all your components. Now you're assembling your tool and you're checking to see what your tool inventory is. At the to be measured stage, your offset measurements and your tool are now at the presetter. And then once the presetter is done, it basically applies the offset measurements of this tool instance, and then it automatically goes over to the to be provided stage. Now, once you're at the to be provided stage, it allows you to then kind of review what has been done so far. So you can look at all your tool data associated to it. Primarily, you're going to want to look at the data of the cutting edges and see essentially what offset measurements have changed if needed, and so forth. But if we like everything we see, we can click Save. And now in our to be provided stage, the tool is ready to finish its provision. So what does this mean? We're essentially defining where this tool is going to be located on the shop floor. So I'm going to select my tool, finish provision, and tell it where it's going to go, which cabinet adjacent to the machine it'll be located in. For the sake of this example, I'm just going to throw it on the Sinutrain cabinet. And then I'll place it into container 1 and click Store. So now, again, this was done virtually, but my tool has just been brought over. Imagine we're on the shop floor. We just logged this tool is now in the cabinet next to Sinutrain. And now from the Sinutrain controller, or that operator next to the Sinutrain machine, now has access and transparency as to where that tool is located and accessible to them. So I have another virtual machine open that looks like the HMI of a controller, and kind of interfaces one as well. This is actually, if you watch my previous videos, this is Sinutrain, and I have it integrated with the Manage My Resources tools application. So directly from this controller, let's say we want to utilize those new offset measurements, that new tool that we just brought over to the cabinet. We can do so by simply going into the embedded Manage My Resources Tools soft key. Here we can see our entire tool inventory of what's currently on the controller, but we can also see the external tools list. So if I was to click this, for example, here we have our ID 1234 tool that's located in the cabinet 1 that we just defined. So now imagine all that offset data, all the measurements in that life cycle, that instance of the tool is being stored on the server. I don't have to manually punch in offsets. I don't have to worry about operator intervention. Everything's being managed digitally. So I can click on my ID 1234. I can load this tool. Let's put it into the place 16 because I believe it was 1 through 15 were already occupied. Or I can throw it in a different magazine, for example. Click OK, and now that tool is located inside my machine. I have a target lifespan of essentially this tool, so every time it's being machined, it's counted down numerically from the timeline. And I can go ahead and machine without a worry because those offset measurements of the tool are now located here. So again, we have tool details. We have all the information of our tool listed here, as well as any user-defined information, as well as the edge details. So we have our time remaining, the geometry of the tool. So if you're utilizing that length, for example, or any type of radius cuts, it's all defined right in the HMI of the controller, automatically loaded from the server. And the goal here is really to minimize the time it takes to, machine your parts. And it does so by mitigating that human element, that human intervention variable of punching in offset measurements for your tools. Now, if you want to unload the tool, you can do so right here again. We're in unload. Define our unload reason. Let's say it was worn out, for example. And I want to place it in the cabinet. So we'll just throw it back into the cabinet right next to us. Click OK. And now our tool's done. But you can do the same thing for a one-to-one exchange. Let's say we're still utilizing that tool, but that tool is worn out. We want to use the same new tool, throw it back in. We can do transfer list, offline handling if we ever lose connection. Define priorities. So maybe this tool is covering some of a reservation. So once when it's done, it goes to this machine rather than going into the cabinet, and much more. And I do plan to do more of these type of videos and kind of showcase the bigger picture of all the different applications and functionality you can do. As you can see, just from our main screen, we covered, I think, 4, maybe 5 of these tabs, but there's much more to show, much more to cover, but I don't want to do a large 2-hour discussion. Covering the high level, Manage My Resources tools, covering your physical and digital tool inventory on the shop floor. Hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching.